How did your parents completely mess you up? My parents hung metal bars across our bedroom ceilings when I was 9 and made us wrap our legs around them to sleep upside down like bats because they believed gravity was poisoning our brains. Mom and Dad had joined this group that taught gravity pulled toxins into your skull while you slept normally. The leader said humans were meant to hang like our ancestors who lived in trees. They came home from the first meeting with construction equipment and spent all night installing bars strong enough to hold our weight. Dad tested each one by hanging from it himself, timing how long before his face turned purple. The first night was torture. They showed us how to hook our knees over the bars and cross our ankles for security. My little brother cried until he threw up, which looked terrifying coming out upside down. Mom just cleaned it up and rehung him. She said our bodies needed time to remember their natural position. Blood rushed to my head until I thought my eyes would explode. But they padlocked our door and removed the regular bed, so we had no choice. After a week, we learned to sleep in short bursts before the headaches got too bad. Then Mom decided we weren't hanging long enough. She installed timer locks on our knee hooks that wouldn't release for 8 hours. If we needed the bathroom, too bad. She gave us adult diapers and said our ancestors didn't climb down from trees for every little thing. My sister developed constant nosebleeds from the pressure, but Dad said that was just toxins leaving her brain. School was impossible when we kept falling asleep at our desks from exhaustion. The nurse called home about the rope burns on our legs and the burst blood vessels in our eyes. Mom withdrew us for homeschooling, saying traditional education was poisoning us with right-side-up thinking. She hung bars in every room so we could practice proper positioning all day. Even meals happened upside down, with special straws and tubes so we could eat without choking. I tried sleeping on the floor one night, but Dad had installed motion sensors. Alarms screamed until they found me and rehung me with zip ties instead of the timer locks as punishment. The ties cut off circulation and my feet turned blue. They only cut me down when I started convulsing. Mom said I was having a gravity detox seizure and hung me right back up with looser ties. My brother figured out he could unhook one leg at a time and rotate to prevent the worst pain. But Mom caught him and decided he needed stronger treatment. She ordered special boots that locked onto the bars and couldn't be removed without a key. The boots were so heavy they stretched our knee joints backwards. He screamed for hours until his voice gave out. Then they got boots for all of us. The group leader visited to check our progress and said we weren't inverting young enough. He had a newborn daughter who'd been hanging since birth and never experienced gravity poisoning. Mom got pregnant immediately just to prove she could raise a properly inverted baby. She hung upside down her entire pregnancy. When my new sister was born, they hung a tiny bar in her crib with special harnesses. She never learned to crawl normally, just swung bar to bar like they wanted. Then I found Dad's laptop open to the group's private forum. The leader was selling our progress photos to medical fetish sites. Hundreds of pictures of us hanging unconscious, bleeding, crying. Members paid extra for video of our detox seizures. The leader used the money to build a compound where families could live fully inverted. Dad had already put down a deposit. I printed everything and hid it inside my gravity boot. But before I could use it, Mom announced we were moving to the compound next week. She'd sold our house to prove commitment. The new place had no regular floors, just bars at different heights. Bathrooms were holes in the ceiling. Kitchen appliances hung upside down. She showed us proudly like it was paradise. That night, I cut through my bootstraps with a stolen knife. My legs were so deformed I couldn't stand normally, but I crawled to my sister's room. She was only 6, but helped me cut the others free. We made it to the front door before Dad heard us. He came swinging across the ceiling bars like some nightmare acrobat, faster than we could crawl with our ruined legs. He grabbed my brother first, rehanging him by his ankles with rope. Then my older sister, using zip ties so tight she couldn't scream. My baby sister tried to swing away on her little arms, but Mom caught her and locked her into a special full-body harness. I made it outside, but my legs wouldn't hold me. I dragged myself across the lawn toward the street, leaving blood trails from where the boots had rubbed my skin raw. Then I heard Mom laughing behind me. "Sweetheart, you can't even walk anymore. Your body knows where it belongs." I looked back to see her and Dad standing normally, casually, like their legs worked fine, like they'd never hung upside down at all. Dad picked me up easily and carried me back inside. As he locked my new boots onto the bar, tighter than ever before, Mom said, "The leader's doctors are coming tomorrow to make the inversion permanent. Just a small surgery on your inner ear so you'll never want to be right side up again." She left the room and her footsteps went down the hall while I hung there testing how much these new boots would let me move. The metal bar creaked when I shifted my weight, but it held solid. These weren't the cheap ones from before that we could sometimes wiggle out of. These were thick industrial things with locks that looked like they came from a real medical supply company. My little brother was whimpering through the wall between our rooms, and I tried to call out to tell him it would be okay. But my voice came out as this broken croak because my throat was still wrecked from all the screaming during our escape attempt. Even trying to make words hurt, and all I could manage was this rough whisper that he probably couldn't hear. The house got quiet except for Mom and Dad talking downstairs about tomorrow's big day and how proud the leader would be. Hours passed with blood pounding in my ears, and my vision getting darker around the edges from hanging so long. Then around midnight when everything was still, I felt something weird against my ankle inside the boot. My fingers could barely reach down far enough, but I managed to grab what felt like a small piece of paper. It was a business card, and when I twisted it toward the moonlight from the window, I could make out writing on the back, "Call if you need help," and a phone number underneath. The younger assistant from earlier must have stuck it in there when they were checking the boots. I couldn't write the number down anywhere, so I started repeating it over and over in my head. 7 digits became the only thing I could think about while I hung there. 555-4321. 555-4321. I said it hundreds of times until it was burned into my brain even as my vision kept going dark. Dad did his regular check at 2 in the morning, coming up with his flashlight to shine it right in my face. He checked that the boots were still locked tight and that I was hanging the right way. I'd pressed the business card flat against my palm against the metal bar where he couldn't see it. He grunted that everything looked good and went to check on the others. By the time dawn came, my legs had gone totally numb below the knees, which actually made the pain better. I could hear Mom downstairs in the kitchen making breakfast and talking on the phone, all happy about today's medical procedure. She was telling someone how excited she was that we'd finally be permanently fixed. My older sister managed to twist herself enough that she could see me through our doorways since they'd left them open. She mouthed, "Help us," and I nodded just a little bit, trying to tell her I had something even though I wasn't sure what I could actually do with a phone number I couldn't even call. Mom came up around 8 with protein shakes in these squeeze bottles, holding them to our mouths while we hung there. She said the doctors would be here at noon and we needed to be properly nourished for the procedure. The shake was thick and gross and I started coughing on purpose, making it seem like I was choking. Mom had to lower me a little bit to pat my back, and while she was focused on that, I let the business card drop from my hand. It fluttered down behind the dresser where I hoped someone would find it later. She got me breathing normal again and re-hung me even tighter than before. Then Dad came up with a clipboard and these consent forms, making us practice signing our names while hanging upside down. He said the doctors needed proper documentation that we agreed to the procedure. My signature looked like a little kid had written it because my hands were shaking, and all the blood in my head made it hard to see straight. But that seemed to make him happy because he said it showed we really needed the surgery to fix us. He had each of us sign multiple copies, even my baby sister who could barely hold the pen. The morning dragged on with them getting everything ready downstairs, moving furniture to make room for the medical equipment. I kept repeating that phone number in my head and trying to figure out any way to use it. My legs were so numb now I couldn't feel anything, which scared me more than the pain had. What if they were dying up there and would have to be cut off? Mom wouldn't care as long as we stayed inverted. She'd probably see it as proof we were evolving past the need for legs. Through the window, I could see a van pulling up outside and my stomach dropped even though I was upside down. This was really happening unless I could figure out something fast. The younger assistant got out first, looking nervous and checking his phone a lot. Then an older man with a medical bag who must have been the lead doctor. They started unloading equipment and carrying it toward the house while Dad went down to let them in. I heard car doors slam outside at 10 that morning and crawled across the bar to look out my bedroom window. 2 men were pulling medical equipment from a white van, the younger one from yesterday checking his phone every few seconds while the older guy sorted through bags. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips gripping the metal bar. They carried boxes and cases toward our front door, and I heard Dad's voice downstairs greeting them like old friends. His footsteps came up the stairs with 2 more sets following behind. The younger assistant looked up at me the second they walked into my room and I mouthed, "Please help," as clear as I could make it. He stopped for just a second before looking away and following the older doctor to my sister's room. The lead doctor started checking my older sister's pupils with a small flashlight while she hung there, then tested her reflexes by tapping her knees with some metal tool. He said something quiet about liability and asked Dad if he had medical power of attorney for us kids. Dad got all defensive and started talking louder about how this was alternative medicine, and they didn't need regular paperwork. The younger assistant came over to me with a blood pressure cuff and wrapped it around my arm. When he leaned in to pump it up, I grabbed his wrist with my free hand and squeezed as hard as I could. He looked right at my face and saw how scared I was, then said he needed to check my blood pressure in private without distractions. Dad rolled his eyes but stepped out into the hallway to keep arguing with the lead doctor about paperwork. The assistant leaned close to my ear and whispered fast that what they were doing was illegal, and he'd already called someone that morning. He told me to fake a seizure in exactly 5 minutes, then left to go stall the procedure by asking the doctor questions about equipment. I started breathing faster and faster to make my heart race, feeling my body shake against the restraints. The shaking got real when panic kicked in, but I went with it, letting my eyes roll back into my head. My whole body started jerking and I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The lead doctor ran into my room and grabbed my wrist to check my pulse, then told Dad they couldn't do any procedure without hospital clearance for what he called my pre-existing condition. Dad started yelling about how we were moving to the compound tomorrow and this had to happen today. Mom came running up the stairs screaming about the house being sold and everything being ready. The doctor kept shaking his head and talking about liability protection and how he needed an ER to sign off first. The younger assistant pulled out his phone and said they should call 911 for an ambulance to make it official. Before my parents could say anything, he was already talking to dispatch about a minor having seizures who needed immediate transport. Dad tried to grab the phone, but the assistant stepped back and kept talking, giving our address and saying it was urgent. Within 10 minutes, I heard sirens coming down our street. 2 EMTs came up the stairs with a stretcher, 1 woman and 1 man, both in blue uniforms with radios on their shoulders. The woman took one look at me hanging from the bar and the rope burns on my legs, then looked at her partner with this expression I'll never forget. She asked Dad to explain what she called the therapeutic equipment while her partner started checking my pulse and blood pressure. Dad launched into this whole speech about gravity poisoning and how humans were meant to sleep inverted. The male EMT kept writing stuff down on a clipboard while the woman shined a light in my eyes and asked if I could hear her. She asked me directly if I felt safe, and when Dad started to answer for me, she held up her hand and said firmly she needed to hear from the patient. I shook my head no, and she immediately looked at her partner who nodded back. They said they had to take me down from the bar to transport me safely on the stretcher. Dad argued, but they said it was protocol, and started unlocking my boots with bolt cutters they pulled from their bag. As they lowered me down, my legs wouldn't hold any weight, and I collapsed into the woman's arms. She held me steady while I whispered, "Help my siblings," into her ear. She squeezed my hand and whispered back that they were mandatory reporters and this would be handled. They strapped me onto the stretcher and started carrying me downstairs while Mom followed behind yelling about parental rights and alternative healing. The male EMT turned around and told her she could follow in her car to the hospital but couldn't ride in the ambulance. Once they got me loaded in the back, the woman sat next to me and told me I was safe now. The doors closed and we started moving, sirens blaring as we pulled away from the house. I told them everything in one long rush about the bars and the compound and the photos being sold online. The woman wrote down every word while the man radioed ahead to the hospital about what they were bringing in. She held my hand the whole ride and told me I'd done the right thing by letting them know I needed help. The ambulance pulled into the emergency room bay, and they wheeled me through automatic doors into bright lights that made me squint after being in the dark ambulance. The EMTs transferred me to a hospital bed while talking fast to nurses about what they'd found, using words like mandatory reporter and suspected abuse. A doctor came over right away, younger than Dad with dark hair and tired eyes, and introduced himself as Dr. Derek Rosen while he started checking my legs. He moved each joint slowly, and I winced when he bent my knees because they'd been locked straight for so long. He pressed different spots on my legs and asked if I could feel it, then frowned when I couldn't feel anything below my knees. He shined a light in my eyes and checked behind my ears where the blood vessels had burst from hanging upside down. His hands were gentle, but I could see his jaw getting tighter with each injury he found. He asked if there were other kids at home, and I nodded, telling him about my 4 siblings still hanging from the bars. He stopped examining me for a second and looked at the nurse who was already picking up the phone. The nurse came back with a camera and started taking pictures of every bruise, every rope burn, every place where the boots had cut into my skin. The flash kept going off while Dr. Rosen made notes on a clipboard, measuring the marks and writing down numbers. He told the nurse to call social services and security, then turned back to me and said I was safe now, and they wouldn't let my parents take me back. About 20 minutes later, I heard Mom's voice echoing down the hallway, getting louder as she got closer. She was yelling about her rights as a parent and how the hospital had no authority to keep her child. Security guards appeared outside my room and wouldn't let her pass the doorway. She tried to push through, but they held firm, telling her she could wait in the family room. I could see her face between the guards, red and angry, screaming about alternative medicine and government interference. The nurse came over and held my hand while Mom kept yelling, her voice carrying through the whole emergency room about lawsuits and kidnapping. After security finally got Mom to the waiting room, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes came in carrying a folder. She said she was the hospital social worker and helped kids in dangerous situations. She pulled a chair close to my bed and asked if I could tell her about home. I described the bars in every room, the timer locks that wouldn't open for 8 hours, the heavy boots that stretched our knees backwards. I told her about the surgery planned for tomorrow to mess with our inner ears so we'd never want to be upright again. She wrote everything down without looking shocked, just nodding and asking for more details about the locks and timers. About an hour passed before 2 more people showed up, a woman with short blonde hair and a man in a suit. The woman introduced herself as Lori Pearson from CPS, and the man as Detective Dexter Bradshaw. They asked me to go through everything again, starting from when my parents first joined the group. I told them about the meetings, the leader who said gravity was poison, how Dad installed the bars himself. I gave them the compound address Dad had written on a paper I'd seen, the one where we were supposed to move next week. Lori wrote it all down and said they were getting an emergency order from a judge to check on my siblings right away. She promised they'd be removed tonight and asked if we had any relatives who could take us. I told her about Mom's sister who lived 2 states away, but she'd stopped talking to us after Mom joined the group. Detective Bradshaw asked about the photos I'd mentioned to the EMTs, and I told him everything I'd seen on Dad's laptop. I described the forum where parents posted pictures of their kids hanging, the prices for different types of photos, how the leader used the money to build his compound. I'd memorized the medical equipment company name from the boxes our boots came in, Gravity Free Solutions, and he wrote that down too. He asked if I remembered the website address, and I did because I'd looked at it so many times trying to figure out how to report it. While they were asking questions, Dr. Rosen came back with x-ray results showing stretched ligaments in my knees and compressed nerves in my legs. He said I'd need physical therapy for months to walk normal again, but the damage should heal since I was still young. Lori kept checking her phone and finally smiled, telling me the judge signed the order and police were heading to my house right now. She said my siblings would be brought to the hospital for medical checks just like me. Detective Bradshaw asked if I'd be willing to talk to more investigators later, and I said yes because I wanted the leader arrested. He said the FBI would probably get involved since the website crossed state lines and involved kids from multiple states. The nurse brought me juice and crackers, the first food I'd eaten right side up in months, and I had to eat slowly because my stomach wasn't used to gravity pulling food down the right way. Lori stayed with me while we waited for news about my siblings, telling me about foster families who were trained to help kids who'd been through trauma. Around 7 that night, Lori came back to my hospital room with papers in her hand and sat down next to my bed. She told me police had gotten all my siblings out of the house and brought them here for medical checks. My little brother was 2 floors down getting IV fluids because he was so dehydrated from hanging all day. The baby sister was in the pediatric unit getting looked at by specialists since she'd never really walked normal. My older sister had bad rope burns on her ankles that needed cleaning, and my younger sister was getting x-rays of her spine. They were all safe though, and nobody was going back to that house. Detective Bradshaw showed up about an hour later with his notebook out and a tired look on his face. He said they'd searched the whole house and found everything I'd described, plus more. The bars were still there with blood on some of them, and they'd taken photos of every room. Dad's computer had hundreds of pictures of us hanging and crying that matched what I'd told them about the website. They'd arrested both my parents at the house and charged them with child abuse and endangerment. Mom had screamed about her rights, and Dad had tried to explain about the gravity poisoning, but the officers didn't care. They were both in jail now waiting to see a judge. The next morning, a different woman from the court came to explain that a judge had signed emergency papers putting all of us in protective custody. We couldn't go home even if we wanted to, and our parents couldn't come near us. She said CPS would find foster homes for us, and they'd try to keep us together, but sometimes that was hard with 5 kids. I asked about Mom's sister who lived far away, and she wrote down her name to check if she could take us. Later that day, they moved me to a different building called the Child Advocacy Center, where a nice woman with glasses recorded everything I said about what happened. She had toys and stuffed animals in her office even though I was too old for them. She let me stop whenever I needed water or got too upset remembering things. I told her about the bars and the boots and the compound we were supposed to move to. She asked really specific questions about dates and times and who did what to which kid. It took 3 hours to tell everything, and she said I did great. The next afternoon, they brought all my siblings to a big room at the hospital for us to see each other with a social worker watching. My little brother could barely walk and had to use a walker to get around. His legs were bent weird from the boots and he moved real slow. But when he saw me, he smiled for real for the first time in forever. My older sister had bandages on her wrists from the zip ties, and my younger sister kept rubbing her back where it hurt. The baby just sat there, not really understanding what was happening. We all hugged, careful not to hurt each other's injuries. A physical therapist came in to look at all of us and explain what months of hanging had done to our bodies. Our muscles had gotten weak in some places and too tight in others from the weird position. Our spines were compressed and our knees were stretched out wrong. She showed us gentle exercises we could do lying down to start fixing things. She said it would take months of therapy, but kids' bodies could heal if we worked at it. Most of us should walk normal again eventually, but my little brother might always have some problems. Detective Bradshaw visited me again a few days later with updates on the case. They'd arrested the cult leader at his compound along with the fake doctors who were supposed to do our surgery. The FBI was taking over parts of the case because the website went to people in different states, and that made it federal. They'd found other families at the compound living the same way with kids hanging from bars. Those kids were getting rescued too. A week after that, a woman named Beth Staley started meeting with me every day. She was a victim advocate, which meant she helped kids who had to go to court. She explained that there would be hearings and maybe a trial where I'd have to talk about what happened. It would be scary, but important to make sure our parents got in trouble for what they did. She taught me about what prosecutors do and what defense lawyers do and how judges decide things. She said my testimony was really important because I was old enough to explain everything clearly. 2 weeks passed before they let us see Mom and Dad at the CPS office with lots of supervision. They brought our parents into a room with a big mirror that people could watch through. Mom looked smaller somehow, and Dad's face was puffy from crying. They sat across from us at a big table with a social worker between us. Mom started crying right away, saying we'd ruined everything and destroyed our family. Dad kept talking about how we didn't understand the benefits of inversion and how the government was poisoning our minds. They blamed us for getting them arrested and said we'd regret this when the toxins built up in our brains. Neither of them said sorry or asked if we were okay. The social worker ended the visit after 20 minutes when Mom started yelling. That visit helped me understand they really believed the crazy stuff, or at least would never admit they were wrong. 3 days before the hearing, the prosecutor met with me in a small conference room at the courthouse. She spread out photos and documents on the table and explained how she'd present the case. The physical evidence was really strong with all the photos and equipment from the house. My testimony plus my siblings' statements made it clear abuse happened. She said my parents' lawyers were already talking about plea deals to avoid a full trial. They'd probably get 5 to 7 years in prison if they admitted guilt. She prepared me for what questions I might get asked and how to answer clearly. The preliminary hearing was tomorrow, and I'd have to tell the judge what happened to us. The morning of the hearing, my hands shook so bad I couldn't button my shirt properly. Beth Staley met me outside the courthouse and walked me through the metal detectors while explaining what would happen inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood panels everywhere, and a high bench where the judge would sit. Mom and Dad were already there with their lawyers at a table on the left side of the room. They both stared at me when I walked in, but the bailiff told them to face forward. The prosecutor showed me where to sit and reminded me to speak clearly into the microphone. When the judge came in, everyone stood up and then she told us to sit down. She was an older woman with gray hair who looked at me over her glasses before asking if I was ready to testify. I nodded and walked to the witness stand where the bailiff made me promise to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked me to describe what happened at our house, and I told her about the bars and the boots and hanging upside down. I explained how Mom and Dad made us stay inverted for hours and how they planned to move us to the compound. The judge wrote notes while I talked and sometimes asked me to repeat things or speak louder. Mom's lawyer asked if maybe I misunderstood what my parents were trying to do for our health. I said there was no misunderstanding when your legs don't work anymore from hanging upside down. He asked if I ever told anyone at the school, and I explained how Mom pulled us out for homeschooling. The judge asked to see the photos of our injuries that the hospital took. She looked at each one carefully, and her face got harder with every picture. After 2 hours of questions, she said she'd heard enough evidence to move forward with a trial. She signed papers keeping the no-contact order in place, which meant Mom and Dad couldn't come near us. 3 days later, Lori picked us up from the temporary shelter and drove us to meet our foster family. The Hoopers lived in a regular 2-story house with a big backyard and a swing set that looked normal. Cheryl Hooper came out to meet us with cookies she'd just baked and didn't try to hug us or anything. She showed us around the house and pointed out our bedrooms, which had regular beds with soft blankets. She said we could sleep however felt comfortable and nobody would make us do anything weird. Gene Hooper was working in the garage when we arrived but came in to say hello. He was tall with a beard and spoke really quiet, like he understood we might be scared of men. My little brother hid behind me at first, but Gene just smiled and went back to his project. That first night, I kept waking up expecting to be hanging from a bar. The bed felt too soft and wrong after months of being inverted. Cheryl found me sitting on the floor at 3 a.m. and just brought me a pillow without asking questions. Over the next few days, Gene started helping my little brother with the physical therapy exercises the hospital gave us. My brother's legs were still weak and bent wrong from the boots, but Gene was patient. He'd sit on the floor doing the stretches alongside him to make it less scary. One day, Gene mentioned he'd been hurt as a kid too, and knew how hard it was to trust adults. My brother started opening up after that, and even laughed when Gene made silly faces during the exercises. 3 weeks into living with the Hoopers, I had my first real panic attack. I was lying in bed when suddenly I couldn't breathe, and felt like I was falling even though I wasn't moving. My body expected to be upside down, and being flat made everything feel wrong. The therapist they brought in taught me to count things I could see and touch to stay grounded. She said healing wasn't just a straight line, and some days would be harder than others. That same week, Detective Bradshaw called to tell us something big had happened. Federal agents had raided the cult leader's compound after getting warrants based on our case and the evidence. They found dozens of families living there with kids hanging from bars just like we had been. The story was all over the news, but they kept our names secret since we were minors. Seeing footage of other kids being rescued made me realize we weren't the only ones this happened to. A few days later, Lori brought us letters from some of those other kids. They'd asked CPS to thank us for speaking up because our case gave them the courage to tell too. One girl wrote that she'd been hanging for 3 years and thought nobody would believe her. Another boy said his parents ran away when the agents came, but at least he was free now. Reading their letters made all the scary court stuff feel worth it. The prosecutor called to update us on the case against Mom and Dad. She said the trial was set for 2 months out, but their lawyers were already talking about plea deals. If they admitted guilt, they'd probably get 5 to 7 years in prison instead of the maximum sentence. Part of me wanted them to get longer, but mostly I just didn't want to testify again. Meanwhile, my baby sister was making amazing progress with her physical therapy. She'd never walked normally before since Mom had her hanging from birth, basically. The physical therapist worked with her every day, teaching her how to put weight on her feet. One afternoon, she took 5 steps across the living room without holding on to anything. Everyone started crying, including Jean and Cheryl, who'd been cheering her on for weeks. Watching her learn to walk like a regular kid made everything we went through feel less permanent. About a month after moving in with the Hoopers, I started going back to the school. They set up an IEP for me, which meant I got extra time for assignments and could leave class if I had panic attacks. The other kids didn't know my story, which was exactly what I wanted. For a few hours each day, I could just be a normal student worrying about homework instead of court dates. Detective Bradshaw visited one afternoon with more news about the investigation. The company that made the medical equipment Mom and Dad bought was cooperating completely with police. They had no idea their products were being used to hurt kids and felt terrible about it. They were going through their sales records to identify other families who might be doing the same thing. 4 months passed before the prosecutor finally called about my parents' case. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when Cheryl handed me the phone and the prosecutor explained they'd taken plea deals that morning. 5 years minimum in prison, plus they'd lose all parental rights forever, which meant no trial, and we wouldn't have to testify. My hand shook as I hung up and told my siblings, who were watching TV in the living room. My little brother jumped up and hugged me so hard we both fell backwards onto the couch, while my older sister just sat there nodding over and over like she couldn't stop. That night at dinner, Jean and Cheryl looked at each other across the table before Cheryl cleared her throat and asked if maybe we'd like to stay with them permanently, or even think about adoption someday. My siblings all said yes immediately, but the words stuck in my throat because having parents again felt too big to process. I pushed my food around my plate and asked for time to think, which they said was totally fine, and there was no rush at all. The next week in family therapy, we sat in a circle on the floor, and the therapist asked us to share one thing we'd never been allowed to say before. My older sister started talking about the nosebleeds and how scared she was every time blood poured down her face while hanging upside down. Her voice cracked and tears ran down her cheeks as she described wiping blood off the floor before Mom saw it. We all moved closer and held her while she sobbed into my shoulder, getting snot all over my shirt, but nobody cared. 2 days later, Detective Bradshaw called with news that made the local paper's front page. The cult leader got sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for child exploitation and abuse after they found thousands of photos on his computers. Seeing his mugshot on TV that night with the word "convicted" underneath made something loosen in my chest, like a knot coming undone. 6 months after our escape, I realized I'd slept through the whole night without waking up in panic, thinking I was upside down. My legs still hurt sometimes, especially when it rained, but the physical therapist said that was normal nerve regeneration and would keep getting better. She showed me exercises to strengthen my ankles and wrote notes for school so I could sit out of gym class when needed. During Sunday dinner a week later, we talked about the adoption question again, and this time I said yes along with everyone else. Jean got so excited he knocked over his water glass, reaching across the table to hug us all at once. My little brother looked at the huge chocolate cake Cheryl brought out and said at least this family's weird thing was just eating too much dessert instead of hanging from the ceiling. Everyone laughed so hard Jean snorted milk out his nose, which made us laugh even harder. The adoption got finalized on a Tuesday morning at the courthouse downtown. We all wore our nicest clothes, which meant borrowed dress shoes that pinched our feet since we'd never owned any before. The same judge who'd signed our emergency removal order 8 months earlier now signed the papers, making us officially Hoopers. She smiled and said we deserved every bit of happiness coming our way, then let us take pictures with her gavel. Back at home, Cheryl and Jean sat us down and said they understood if calling them Mom and Dad felt wrong after everything. They suggested we could just use their first names, which felt right because those words carried too much weight from before. My baby sister turned 3 that spring and had zero memory of the bars or boots or hanging upside down at all. She thought it was just a weird game her siblings wouldn't play when she tried to hang from the monkey bars at the park. Watching her run around like any normal kid without fear made everything we went through worth it somehow. A year after our escape, I stood at a podium in a conference room full of CPS workers from 3 states. My voice shook as I explained how one person believing me when I said we needed help had saved 7 lives, including a baby who'd never known normal gravity. I showed them pictures of the rope burns and joint damage while explaining what to look for in cult abuse cases. Several people cried when I described the boots and timer locks, but I kept going because they needed to know these things really happened. After my speech, a dozen caseworkers came up to thank me and say they'd already started investigating similar cases in their districts. One woman from Oregon said she'd just removed 4 kids from a family doing almost the exact same thing with ceiling bars. Back home that night, we had pizza and watched movies like we did every Friday now. My little brother fell asleep with his head on Jean's shoulder, while my older sister painted my baby sister's nails bright purple. Cheryl made popcorn and brought out 5 different kinds of candy, because she said we'd missed too many years of junk food. Looking around at my siblings safe and happy in a normal living room with normal furniture made my chest feel full in a way I couldn't explain. The prosecutor called the next week to say Mom and Dad had been transferred to separate prisons 400 miles apart and wouldn't be eligible for parole for at least 4 years. She also mentioned the FBI had shut down 3 more compounds and rescued 47 kids total based on evidence from our case. My older sister had started talking about maybe becoming a social worker someday to help kids like us, and I was thinking about law school eventually to prosecute cases like ours. Spring came and my older sister spent weeks writing her college application essay about what happened to us. She showed me the draft where she described the bars and boots and how Lori had saved us all. The admissions committee at the state university called her personally to say they'd never read anything like it. They offered her a full scholarship right there on the phone, and she started crying so hard she couldn't answer. She managed to say yes and told them she wanted to major in social work to help other kids get out of bad situations. That summer, Jean bought lumber and spent every weekend building us a treehouse in the backyard. Not the weird kind with bars, but a regular one with walls and a floor where you could sit normally. He hammered boards together while we handed him nails and held pieces steady. My little brother painted it blue because that was his favorite color now that he could see colors right side up again. We spent evenings up there playing board games and eating sandwiches that Cheryl passed up through the window. Sometimes we just sat there looking at the stars through the skylight Jean had cut in the roof. The prosecutor called one afternoon to tell us the fake doctors had been sentenced. The main one got his medical license revoked, and 2 years in prison for practicing without proper credentials and child endangerment. The younger assistant who'd helped me that day testified against his partner and got a lighter sentence. He sent me a letter through the prosecutor apologizing for not acting sooner and saying my fake seizure had given him the courage to finally call for help. Reading his apology made something tight in my chest loosen up a little bit. 2 years after our rescue, we looked like any other kids at the school. My little brother tried out for the basketball team and made junior varsity even though the doctors had said the joint damage might be permanent. He practiced free throws in our driveway every night until his knees ached, but he never complained. During games, I watched him run up and down the court with no sign of the boy who couldn't walk 2 years earlier. My baby sister had no memory of hanging at all and thought we were making up stories when we mentioned it. She ran around the playground like any normal 5-year-old and hung from the monkey bars for fun, which made us all nervous even though we knew it was different. Senior year, I applied to the pre-law program at the state university, where my older sister was already studying social work. The application asked for a personal statement about why I wanted to study law. I wrote about sitting in that courtroom watching the prosecutor fight for us, and knowing I wanted to do that for other kids someday. Beth wrote my recommendation letter, and later the admissions counselor told me it was the strongest letter they'd ever received. She'd called me one of the bravest people she'd ever met, and said I'd make an incredible advocate for children. The acceptance letter came in March, and Jean framed it to hang on the wall next to my sister's. Graduation day arrived hot and sunny with the ceremony on the football field. I walked across the stage to get my diploma, and heard Cheryl screaming my name from the bleachers. Jean had brought one of those air horns that made everyone turn around to look. My siblings held up signs they'd made with glitter and markers that said embarrassing things about me being their hero. My little brother's sign had a drawing of me in a superhero cape which he'd worked on for days. After the ceremony, we took about 100 pictures with Jean, insisting on every possible combination of people. That night, Cheryl made a huge dinner with all our favorite foods. We sat around the table and she asked us to share what we wanted to do with our lives now that we were moving forward. My older sister talked about her internship at CPS starting in the fall. My little brother said he wanted to be a coach someday to help kids find confidence through sports. So even my baby sister announced she wanted to be a teacher, though she was only 7 and might change her mind a dozen times. Nobody brought up what happened to us before because we'd learned we were more than just survivors of something terrible. 5 years after that night when Mom announced the surgery that would have destroyed us forever, I sat in my law school library studying for criminal procedure. My phone buzzed with a picture from my little brother at his college basketball game, where he'd just made the winning shot. My older sister had graduated and worked as a social worker in the same office where Lori used to work. My baby sister was 12 and had no idea why her siblings got weird about sleepovers sometimes. Cheryl and Jean had officially adopted us 3 years ago, though we still called them by their first names out of habit. We survived everything they did to us and came out the other side as a real family that chose each other. Well, folks, that's it from me today. Thanks for sticking with me and letting me throw my thoughts and questions out there along the way. I really appreciate it. Like the video, it helps more than you think.